Tanse, hello, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Oulette Stonechild. I'm here on Treaty 13 territory in Toronto, and I'm super excited. This is the first podcast episode back, and I have been waiting for this moment all week. I'm here with Tréchelle Bunn. She is the first woman and youngest person ever elected chief of BirdTail Sioux Dakota Nation, and she is currently one of the youngest serving chiefs within this country. I heard of Tréchelle, which I'm very surprised I heard of you at Inspire Awards, because you have done so much great work throughout the 25 years you've been here. But for those listeners that are new to your work, could you introduce yourself, where you're from, and maybe how you're currently feeling?
Yeah, no, I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you today. And I've definitely followed the Matriarch Movement podcast for quite some time. But so my name's Tréchelle Bunn. I'm a proud citizen and the newly elected chief of BirdTail Sioux Dakota Nation. I think, to be in this position is really quite historic. And I know it comes with a huge responsibility, but it's also a huge honor. I didn't grow up in my community. I actually grew up in a small town called Wampum, Manitoba. So right along the Minnesota-Manitoba border. So fun fact, I'm actually a dual citizen. I was born in Minnesota. I'm currently I just finished my second year of law school, and I am going to be trying to juggle both and finish my third year of law school this coming fall. So I definitely have my schedule very, very jam-packed, but I all these opportunities I'm so honored to have.
Yeah, it's been like almost a month now since you got elected. And so how has that been? What has it been like? Even maybe how your community is feeling about it. I mean, you won with like 191 votes, so I'm pretty sure they're pretty excited and pumped that you're now chief. But what has the response been like for you?
Yeah, no, it's been like in the best way possible, like so overwhelming with the outpouring of support, not only from my community and the Indigenous community as a whole, but I think really from people from all across the country and even into the US have been reaching out to me and congratulating me. And I think it definitely, as a young person and the first woman to hold this position in my community, it's been really reassuring, and I think it really resonates with me to know that I have so much support, and especially from other female leaders and been reaching out to me as well. So I know my community was super excited to make history and elect their first female chief, and I think it was kind of an added excitement that I'm also the youngest in our community, but also one of the youngest in Canada. So I think everyone's super excited, and I think there's so much hope. And even speaking with the young people throughout my campaign, it meant a lot to the young people to have, representation within the community as chief. So I think it's setting like a powerful precedent for the young people in my community, which I'm very proud of.
Honestly, like a piece of me wants to like start crying, because I feel like this is like what our ancestors have dreamed of and wanted. And, even starting Matriarch Movement, it was a vision of more women, Indigenous women leading, and to actually see it actualized now, I feel like it's been a long time coming. And I think our country really needs healing, obviously. And I think that is going to be led by Indigenous women. And so for you, is this something that you always saw on your horizon? Or yeah, when did this really start, this vision for you?
Yeah, I think, I always kind of dreamt of, maybe one day leading my community if, they called upon me. And I remember reflecting when I was younger and asking my dad, like, oh, like, how do you become the chief? And he was kind of like, when your community calls upon you, that's when it's going to be your time. And I always kind of, I think, hoped and dreamed that one day my community would call upon me to step up and put my name forward. I definitely, maybe in my life's plan, definitely didn't think it was going to happen when I was 25, but it was probably over a year ago now, maybe 2 years ago. Some elders and community members had, reached out to me and said, like, our elections are coming up April 2025, which at the time felt like a lifetime away. And they're like, we want you to put your name forward for chief. And at first I was very taken aback, and I was like, you sure you want me to run for chief? And I think after kind of speaking with my family and, community members and elders more, I very quickly learned that, people saw this as, my time, and they were calling upon me now. And it was kind of my duty and responsibility to answer that call. So I think everything kind of got really real. So our nomination meeting for my community was on March 3rd, which I guess in storybook fashion was also my 25th birthday.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Synchronicity.
Yeah. So I got nominated for the position of chief on my 25th birthday. And that's kind of when everything, became very like so surreal. And I think, from March 3rd up until the election on April 10th, time just really flew by, but it also felt so long as well. So I think it definitely was something that I always kind of envisioned for myself. I think, the timing came as a huge honor and obviously a huge responsibility. But I think, having that support from my community and to call upon me really gave me that reassurance.
And it's interesting that your dad kind of planted that seed and was like, your community will call on you when it's ready. When did he say that to you? Like, how old are you?
I think maybe when I was like 12 or 13,
Oh
I
my
think is when I
gosh.
first started like getting kind of like like, wanting to like understand how like systems of governance worked, and like especially in my own community. And like he's so like he has the best one-liners, and he's like the source of my inspiration, and everything he says is always so like poetic. And like now as I'm getting older, I'm like everything he said to me is like kind of coming back full circle, and it's like wow, that's crazy. So no, I think we've definitely reflected on that. And he's like, you were always so like inquisitive and always asking questions, and then now to kind of see my questions play out and be answered on my own is very like surreal. I'm like wow,
That's wild. Yeah. I don't know if you pay much attention to like manifestation or visualization or if you do any of that. I'm sure you do in some
yeah,
capacity because you're literally doing so much. But
yeah,
yeah, that's cool. So the seed was planted like literally when you're 12.
yeah.
Um, what was it growing up? I know you mentioned that you didn't grow up in your community, so I'm curious, what was your experience? Where did you grow up, and like, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Wampum, Manitoba, and nobody ever really knows where that is. It's probably about
I actually don't.
yeah, like 2 hours southeast of Winnipeg.
Okay.
So it's really like right along the Minnesota Manitoba border, probably like 10 minutes from the Minnesota border, like Roseau, Minnesota, Warroad, Minnesota.
Mm,
So it's very small, like tight knit community. But I feel fortunate. I think, from a young age, like I was always going back to BirdTail with my family and spending my summers there with my Kushin Uncle, so my grandparents and all my cousins. And we have a beautiful valley in my community. So I'd be racing my cousins up and down the hills in the valley, playing in the valley. So I feel fortunate to have always been like connected to my community. But I think growing up along the border, like one of the biggest things was like crossing the border every single day. So
mm,
I started playing hockey when I was just 3 years old. So my dad built me a
wow.
backyard rink in our backyard. And then I played, the closest hockey team was in Minnesota. So I played my entire hockey career in the US basically. So my parents would drive me across the US border every single day, sometimes twice a day for like hockey practice and games. And then I did attend school in Canada. So like the school in
Mm.
Sprague, Russell Gray School up until seventh grade. And then in eighth grade, I transferred to a school in Minnesota. So I feel like, I was always kind of living life in kind of two worlds in Canada and the US. So I think that was kind of a unique experience for me. And I think I even found like a lot of the language I could think referring to like Indigenous people in the States growing up was so different from what I was used to. I remember when I first transferred to Warroad High School when I was in eighth grade, they were calling like their Indigenous education department like the Indian Ed department,
Oh
and
wow.
I remember I was like, what? Like, what's going on here? So I think that I feel like that's kind of like a unique life experience for me growing up along the border. Is like, I had like my kind of kindergarten to grade 7 education in Canada and
Mhm.
then transferring to the States and kind of seeing that difference, especially when being a First Nations person. So it was definitely a unique experience, but I think I owe so much to the States for my hockey career. So
That's amazing. And it sounds like your parents were there for you and like making sure you made all your schedule and your appointments and
yes.
everything. I'm curious about the matriarchs in your life and who are matriarchs that have shaped who you are today.
Yeah, I think my mom, she always gets maybe a little bit jealous because I'm always quoting my dad's one-liner. He doesn't get a shout out quite as often, but I think a lot of parents maybe tell their kids like, I believe in you and you can do anything you put your mind to. But I think that's something my mom kind of instilled in me and told me from a very young age. And I remember, any dream that I ever had, she was like, you can do it. And she was so sincere in that belief to me that it made me really feel like, well, I could really do anything. And that's kind of something that I hope to, give back to the next generation now is like, don't limit yourself. And from a very young age, my mom kind of instilled that in me. And I
Mm,
think it was almost passed down to her from my grandma Shirley of, being a hard worker and, having a plan and dreams, but taking tangible steps to get to them.
mm,
So I think I really owe that to her of, not only being a big dreamer, but being someone who takes action to get to that dream. So definitely my mom, I think, a huge matriarch in my life. And I even feel fortunate to, I think in terms of kind of a leadership journey, Minister Nahani Fontaine. And
Yeah.
I know she's been a huge supporter of me throughout the years, and has been a very guiding light to me. And we first crossed paths when I transferred back to the University of Manitoba from the University of Calgary for my third year of my undergraduate degree. And I was a part of this Indigenous student leadership group called the Indigenous Circle of Empowerment. And she came and spoke to our student group. And ever since then, we've kind of been connected. And she's she's so amazing, and is, what I see as a true, matriarch. And even I think she was so excited for me and so happy for me to enter in this position. And I definitely acknowledge, female First Nations leaders like her who have, paved that way for the next generation like myself.
Yeah, Nahani Fontaine is amazing. I interviewed her on the podcast as well, and just hearing the story and what she's been through. And she's leading a lot of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit crisis advocacy in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Today is actually May 5th, National Awareness Day of MMIWG2S. I was curious, when you think of Indigenous women and girls and our Two-Spirit people here within Canada, what do you hope to see in terms of advocacy for MMIWG2S specifically?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just really seeing the 231 calls for justice fulfilled and upheld. I think we've had so many, family members and survivors and matriarchs and leaders and advocates really lay that groundwork for us and to lead that path forward. And I think now it's all of our jobs to, continue to go down that path and to educate ourselves and to really fulfill the calls for justice. And I think, for young women, I think also too, I always say that I want, other young women, girls, and two-spirited plus and gender diverse peoples to know that we're not defined by, those statistics stacked against us and those hardships, and to know that you're so valued, you're so loved, and you're so sacred. I think it's so important to also uplift. And I know we face so much harm and so much there's so much hurt in our communities, especially towards our women, two-spirited and gender diverse peoples. But I think also making sure that we know that we're loved and we're valued, and we don't kind of internalize those things.
Yeah, I'm curious what your advice would be for maybe a younger Indigenous woman or girl or Two-Spirit person that's listening to this podcast right now and is maybe not quite sure where to start. I feel like sometimes, I don't know about you, but I can get overwhelmed by like too many directions and too many healing modalities and too many books and too many podcasts. So what would your advice be for like if they want to just take one step today? What would that look like?
Yeah, I think maybe it's a little cliche, but I think, surrounding yourself, and not even like physically, but like just, either following people on social media or trying to reach out and connect with people that you're inspired by and you want to see yourself in, in a similar position. And I think, who you surround yourself with, and like, even follow on social media and try to connect with and create that network, even if it's not super close in proximity, is so inspiring. And I think there's so many options out there. I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed, but I think to really find something that you're so passionate about, where it never feels like it's work, it's hard work. And I think that kind of, I think my message for that is, I feel like people always say like, oh, you have your hands in so many different areas. But for me, I think they all kind of overlap, because they're all things that I'm passionate about and, my heart loves doing. So I think really, having and taking on all those different things and really kind of scoping out like, what is it that sets my heart on fire, and what is it that I'm really passionate about and can I see myself doing. And I think that really comes with reaching out to people that you're inspired by. And I think, myself and even I'm sure yourself, I think we see like so many amazing young, Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit plus people. You can feel sometimes maybe even intimidated to reach out to them. But I think we all want to see each other rise. We all want to see each other succeed. And I think making those connections and getting advice wherever possible, and not being afraid to reach out and ask for help.
Yeah, I feel like that's like true matriarchy in motion. For you, how would you even define the word matriarch too? Because I know we all have like different tribes and different communities and different nations. In your own terms, how would you define the word matriarch?
I see matriarch as like the backbone, like someone who really like is the glue, like just like holds it together. And I think I kind of recognize that from my family. And I see that, and my mom is, without her, we would be very fragmented. And she's kind of that glue that holds us all together. And I think there's so much strength that comes with that and almost so much power, but it's not, power that you yield, it's power that you use to bring people together. And that's kind of what I see as matriarchy is, bringing people together and sharing those connections and being that guiding kind of force and that kind of person that you take someone under their wing and helps guide them. I think that's kind of what I see as matriarchy, just that really backbone and that person that can, forge those connections and bring people together.
Yeah, it's almost like matriarchy is tied to like the relationships that you have with your community. And I know for you, well, obviously you're a chief now, no biggie, but that's going to take a lot of leadership. And so I'm wondering for you, like, what are the values that you hold as a leader?
Yeah, I think, even though I was inquisitive from a young age and, asking about like leadership and different kind of uh, forms of governance, it really wasn't until I joined like that student group at the U of M, my like third year of university, the Indigenous Circle of Empowerment, that I started seeing myself as a leader. Like I think for so long, I didn't see myself as someone who was a leader. And maybe I was someone who from the outset could be seen as being a leader, but I think internally I didn't view myself as a leader. And I think that came from my own kind of internalized perception of, a leader is the loudest person in the room or the person that always has the strongest voice or always knows what to say. And for me, that was never really a way that I kind of viewed myself. And it wasn't until an elder came and spoke to my student group, the Indigenous Circle of Empowerment, and kind of shared that we all have the gift of leadership, and it's about unlocking the gift that we're given. And I think that's when I started to kind of find comfortability and calling myself a leader. And I think I'm someone who kind of leads by example. I'm not always the loudest in the room, but I feel like, I'm someone that's always trying to do the right thing and trying to connect with others. So I think that's kind of what I value about leadership, is to kind of being a bridge builder and a connector, and someone who's willing to listen more than they are to speak.
Hmm.
And I think that's kind of where I'm trying to find comfortability in my leadership style that may be different from, maybe leaders that my community had in the past, or um, a different kind of leadership style that maybe other people kind of see as what a chief should be, or how a leader should lead, or so I think really I'm trying to stay true to, my kind of leadership style that I've grown into. And I think that's really leading by example, and hopefully being that, positive role model and that strong voice. But I think being very strategic about, when I use that and my approach.
It sounds like your leadership is about serving others, and you could see that clearly when you started the reconciliation run. For those of you who don't know about the reconciliation run, could you give them a little cliff notes as to where this idea came to be and who it was supporting?
Yeah. So the reconciliation run kind of started as kind of a first iteration of what my family and I and my community were calling a healing walk. So it was sparked by the 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops. And I remember when I first heard that news, I was driving with my dad, and it kind of got us reflecting on the stories that my grandparents, so my late Kushi Mildred and my late Uncle Donald, spoke about when I was younger, and shared with my dad about their experience at the Birtle Residential School in Birtle, Manitoba. And one thing that my Uncle Donald always said was that when he was at the Birtle Residential School, he wanted nothing more than to run away and go home. And Birtle's like a small town, probably about 15, 20 minutes from my community of BirdTail. Um, and it wasn't until like we started like talking, me and my family, and we're like, well, what can we do to like honor my grandparents, and of course all survivors and those who never made it home across Turtle Island, and especially with all the hurt that was resurfacing with the 215 And that's when the idea kind of came, and I was like, well, why don't we go back to the former Birtle Residential School and walk all the way back to our community of BirdTail in honor of not only my uncle Donald, who, that was his wish, but all the children across Turtle Island who, never made it home, or all the survivors who never got the chance to walk away on their own terms. So that's kind of when the idea grew. So I thought it was just going to be something that my community and family and I did. So on July 1st, 2021, we gathered on the front lawn of the Birtle Residential School. So the Birtle Residential School is still standing in Birtle, Manitoba. So we gathered there, and quickly I realized that it was much more than just my community and my family there, and strangers from all over Manitoba were coming, and non-Indigenous people, and it started with a pipe ceremony and led by an elder and survivor from my community, Terry Westachet. And I think what really spoke to a lot of people that day was like, there he was as a survivor sharing his story on the front lawn of the very institution that tried to eradicate it, and performing a pipe ceremony and practicing our culture in that space. I think really resonated with a lot of people. So once we made it back, we left the former Bird Residential School and made it back to my community of BirdTail that day. We kind of had a feast and a time of sharing for survivors in my community. And I didn't realize it was the first time that a lot of survivors in my community had been back to the school, that they were forcibly taken there, and first time that they felt like they could, kind of publicly share their story, and that people were going to like listen to them and actually hear their truth. So it wasn't really until a non-Indigenous man who had come to participate in the healing walk kind of said, we walked the distance of a half marathon today. We walked about like 21.1 kilometers, that the idea kind of grew into turning it into an annual event and calling it the Reconciliation Run. So we're entering our 4th year this September, and it's official half marathon now. So we have some avid marathon runners coming out and running it. But it starts, the same way with, an elder and survivor from my community sharing their story and having ceremony, and then ending in a community feast. And I think last year, the person who traveled the furthest was all the way from Halifax. And then we had from, BC come out. And I think it's really kind of reached people all across the country and has brought people together in my community. And I think it's been really healing for, Indigenous people, and especially for the elders and survivors in my community. But a lot of non-Indigenous people who come out say it's the first time that they hear an elder and survivor, share their story, and the first time they see a residential school in person. And for a lot of people, it's the first time that they step foot on a First Nation in Canada. Wow. So it now, happens around the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And for a lot of non-Indigenous people, it's really that, they're reflecting and they're educating themselves, in honor of that day. And they're kind of taking that tangible action towards, reconciliation and action, and coming and listening and speaking with survivors and being with community on that day. So it's definitely grown to be bigger than what I could have imagined. But I think I'm so thankful that it's, resonated and impacted so many people.
That's amazing. I mean, it's not only giving a voice to the stories of residential school survivors, and there's healing in them sharing their stories, but then there's healing in witnessing that, and of being a part of a community collectively and doing something together that brings healing, which is like movement is such medicine. And I love that you also stand by that. Can listeners join the run this year?
Yeah, for sure. We're due to my election, we're a little bit behind on opening up registration, but it'll be happening on Saturday, September 27th this year in Birtle, Manitoba. And then we always have like kind of an online virtual option as well, where people can sign up and run kind of in a location that's convenient to them. And we send out kind of like a t-shirt and finisher medal to the virtual participants. So
I might not run it, but I'll walk it for sure. Yeah. I'm not a runner. I stick to yoga.
No, that's the same thing with me, because like all my hockey team. So the first year we had it in 2022, my whole hockey team, so the whole like University of Manitoba Bison women's hockey team came out. Our coach and like the athletic director at the U of M came out, and I think their running joke was that, I was organizing a half marathon, but anyone who really knows me knows that like I do not like running. Like for like hockey conditioning and everything, we'd have to like run like the beep test and yo-yo test, and I always, did really bad on those. So everyone thinks it's so funny that I'm organizing, I organize a half marathon now.
Well, hopefully I can come support because that sounds like a really great event. And I know you mentioned non-Indigenous people love attending, and I'm sure that you've gotten this question a lot throughout your career and your life. But for non-Indigenous people that are listening that have been taking action, maybe through educating themselves, what are some other ways non-Indigenous people can support reconciliation outside of just the run?
Yeah, I think that's a big question, and maybe I'll kind of answer it with a kind of short story that I kind of share sometimes. And we had so the first year that we had the reconciliation run was in 2022, and I actually had a non-Indigenous woman reach out to me prior to the run and ask if she could come and participate. And I think that's something that kind of still happens every year. Maybe it's happening less and less, but I think there's still that kind of hesitancy if non-Indigenous people can participate. But I think it's so oversaid, but reconciliation involves all of us. So, everyone's, I always say everyone's welcome to join us. So long story short, yeah, this non-Indigenous woman had reached out to me. She said, I'm going to be flying from BC, flying to Winnipeg, and then I'm going to be driving out to Birtle. So I was very blown away our first year and thinking, someone, from so far away is going to come participate in our run. And I'm always at the finish line, kind of putting, symbolic kind of finisher medals over people's necks when they cross. And it's not really uncommon for people to be, crying or emotional when they're, running. And this woman in particular, she came, I remember her coming across like the finish line and she was crying, and I gave her a hug, and she asked if she could speak to me for a moment on the side. So she kind of pulled me to the side, and she still was very emotional, and she was like, oh, I just want to tell you like the real reason why I came here today. And I was like, okay, like I wonder what she's going to say. And then it seemed like time almost kind of stopped, and she was like, I just want to tell you that my grandfather and your grandfather can be placed in the Birtle residential school at the same time. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is the same woman who told me she was non-Indigenous. Like, what is she trying to say? And then before, I could say anything, she told me that her grandfather worked at the Birtle residential school. I got emotional, and she said, I wanted to come here today to own my family's truth and to tell my family's truth and to apologize on behalf of my family. And I think I was really blown away by that. And then a quote that she kind of said was, if truth has to become before reconciliation, I want to make sure that I'm sharing my family's truth. And it's not just, Indigenous peoples having, that what sometimes can feel like a burden of, re-traumatizing and resurfacing those traumas and that hurt and that pain. So I thought I was very blown away by that. And she's come back to the run every year since. And she's been so sincere in her reasoning and wanting to, forge a connection with our community and to apologize to survivors on behalf of her family's role. So I think for me, that's kind of been my answer almost of, having non-Indigenous people really kind of confront their own family's truths, even if it's not, a direct connection to, operating a residential school. It's just maybe how you've benefited from that legacy and your role in the ongoing colonialism within this country. So I think kind of a big part of truth and reconciliation is reconciling that personal truth and having those hard conversations. So I think that woman who came and participated in the run, I'm sure that was not an easy or comfortable thing for her to do. And I think it's really important to get uncomfortable and to have those uncomfortable conversations with others, and most importantly yourself.
Yeah, now that you say that, I think in order to heal, you first have to reconcile truth within yourself and within your own lineage. It's almost like you can't really look forward without looking at your past and looking at your own ancestry. Wow, I would have been blown away if I would have met her. Thank you for sharing that story. And now that you are chief, first off, how is your schedule over the next 3 months doing all of this? How do you how do you maintain all these responsibilities and still come from a place of like balance and yeah.
Yeah, I know. I was like kind of struggling with that for like I think throughout like the kind of lead up to the election of I've been someone who's been so like planned and I guess like coordinated and so scheduled my whole life. And I think maybe that kind of comes from like hockey and being a student athlete where I'm like I have my months planned out like far in advance of, kind of my schedule and stuff like that. And there was that kind of time, before the election. I'm like, well, what's going to happen? Like, what's next month going to look like for me? What's like next week going to look like? And I didn't know. So I guess kind of taking my own advice, I've been kind of getting uncomfortable with, the unknown, and trying to be someone who kind of welcomes change in that way. Different, shifting my schedule to accommodate for different things that arise. But I do know I'll be very busy definitely for the next couple of months, probably for the next 4 years. But I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I think, whether it's kind of my studies as a law student, or, being elected chief, or, other kind of advocacy areas, or, boards that I serve on, or, other volunteer opportunities, I find that they all really layer into each other, because they're things that I absolutely love doing and that I'm so passionate about. And I think when you look at it from that way, it's like, wow, like all these things are so interconnected. And I think, especially with, my role as chief, and then also my law school education, it's like they both kind of balance each other, and they can both, play into each other, and they're both going to support, to support my community, and give back to my community in that way. So I think I try to be very strategic with the things that I do, and think, how is this helping me live in reciprocity with my community? And for that, I really kind of take on things that I'm passionate about, but also say no to things that don't really, align with my beliefs and values, and giving back to my community, and kind of living in that reciprocity with my community. So I think it all kind of comes down to really finding, your passion, and your fire, and kind of sifting through those opportunities, and things like that, and making sure that it always connects back to your end goal, and to your values.
Did you have any mentors growing up? Because I don't know, for me, like time management has been a big challenge sometimes. And I think maybe I'm lacking a mentor in time management. So I'm curious, like, where you learned how to navigate your life. Were there mentors that showed you like what to do, or did you just
Yeah.
kind of figure it out?
Yeah, no, like I definitely credit my parents for that, for instilling that in me from a young age. I think they told me that you could try a bunch of different things, but you're gonna have to kind of be strategic about what you're really passionate about. And I think it started with really kind of small things, like I couldn't be a basketball player and a hockey player at the same time. Like it's the same season, like kind of
Right.
pick one or the other. And you always, something my parents always said is like, you want to always give 100% into the things that you take on, and you don't want to ever, not fully give yourself to something that especially you love or you're passionate about. So I think they kind of maybe instilled that in me at a young age. And it started kind of with like maybe smaller things, like picking a sport, or picking a musical instrument to play. But I think one of the biggest mentors in my life now, kind of in this a new stage of my life and journey, has been Kevin Chief. So he's one of the founders of the Winnipeg Aboriginal Sport Achievement Center. He's a former NDP MLA for North Point Douglas, I believe he was. And he's just been so instrumental in my journey. And I think our leadership styles kind of are similar to one another. So it's been really nice to kind of have someone like him support me on my journey. And I think we connect in a lot of different ways, especially through sport as well. So he's a former student athlete from the University of Winnipeg. So he played basketball there. So I think having him, and really having him as a guiding force throughout this new stage of my life has really, helped me on that. And he's been a great mentor to me.
That's amazing to have someone in your corner that has also worn those hats. And I know this isn't the first time you've been chief either. You're the youth chief for, what was it, 2 years?
Yeah.
For the Southern Chiefs organization. I know we have a few minutes left, but could you speak a little bit to what your work was there, and how that's helping you now navigate your new role as the chief of BirdTail?
Yeah, I think honestly, now that I reflect back on it, I think it was like super instrumental and to leading me on the path that I am on today, and into this position. And so I was elected youth chief of the Southern Chiefs organization back in 2022, or no, 2023. So the Southern Chiefs organization represents 32 Anishinaabe and Dakota nations in Southern Manitoba. And one thing that's super unique about the position is, I'm not sure if any other youth councils in Canada operate this way, but when you're the youth chief, you have a vote at the table with the other 32 chiefs. So
Cool.
it's like the tables that I'm sitting at now with SCO as the chief of my nation. It's the same table I was sitting at when I was a youth. And
Oh, cool.
it was all like very much a lot of the work that, myself and there's a male and a female youth chief. So my co-youth chief throughout my term was Josh Gandy, and he was also in law school with me. So we got so connected over our 2-year term. But a lot of the work we did was just, being that youth voice at that table, and voting on behalf of the youth in our communities and nations. And I think that really kind of laid the groundwork for what I'm trying to do now is, taking that next step and making sure that, there's youth voice, not only within that space, but it's being listened to and it's being heard in a good way. So I think that was a lot of the work that we did. And I think my time as SEO Youth Chief was absolutely amazing. And I can't say enough good things about, the Southern Chiefs organization and the work that they do for our young people. And Josh and I even had the opportunity last July to attend and speak at the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland with SCO. And that was amazing. And a part of our delegation was, former National Chief Phil Fontaine, International Chief Willie Littlechild. And so, kind of sitting at the UN alongside those leaders, it was like, wow, like I think it really kind of reinforced that, like, wow, this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life. And this is such a huge honor and responsibility. And I really, credit SCO, and I have so much gratitude for them and for giving those opportunities, not only to myself and Josh, but to youth across, our territories in Southern Manitoba. And another small thing, it was kind of funny because we had our SCO Youth Council elections on March 31st, and then our BirdTail's election was on April 10th. So there was like a small window there where, I was like, I wasn't a chief, and I was just so excited to welcome, the new SCO youth chiefs and new SCO youth council. And it was like, wow, you don't know like the opportunity that you're getting here. So I think it was really cool to people were saying like, oh, it's like a stepping stone. You're like dropping the youth from the chief name. And I'm like, I guess it's kind of like that, but it seemed like it happened so organically. And I think it was everything was very beautiful. The way everything played out was just very beautiful and very surreal. And I'm so grateful.
It sounds like it happened just as it was meant to be, really.
Yeah.
And so now that you are now the newly elected chief, what are some policies and steps you want to make to support your community?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is probably just education and empowering our young people. And I think that's something that I really kind of focused on throughout the campaign was even though, some of our young people weren't of voting age, I was still going and talking with them and meeting with them and meeting with the kids at the school. And it's like, what do you want to see in our community? And, what do you expect of our chief? And I think a lot of the young people were kind of taken aback, and they're like, why are you asking us? Like, and I'm like, oh, because your voice matters. And I honestly want to know what you want to see. Like, you guys are our leaders of today. And I'm a young person myself, and I'm going to be your leader, whether you can vote for me or not. So I think really working with the young people and empowering them. And I think it's said very often, we have to, focus on the next generation. And I think that really resonates with me as a young person, is making sure that the young people in my community are empowered and equipped to chase their dreams, and that they have a voice in these decision-making processes. And I think, that's kind of the biggest thing for me right now.
And I know you've spoken about transparency too, and I think that ties back to when you offered the piece of advice for non-Indigenous people reconciling their truth within themselves. I think that also relates to our communities and how we also have to be transparent and know the truth of what's happening within our own communities. So it's funny how that's almost like a mirror. Before we end, so you had a lot of questions from other Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, my followers on for this podcast. Is it okay if I ask you just a couple from a couple people? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of them just said favorite book. What's your favorite book? I know, it's just like random, just put you on the spot.
The Great Gatsby.
The Great Gatsby. Okay, I haven't read that one.
No, I had to read it for high school, and I kind of fell in love with it, weirdly.
Oh my gosh, that's so random. And the other one is like, what do you do for fun? What do you like to do in your spare time when you're not doing everything else?
I just like to chill, to be honest. Like, I love a good self-care day. Like, go for a facial, go for a walk with. I just got a puppy. I got a mini golden doodle named Shunka. which means dog in Dakota. So
Oh
everyone
my
always says,
gosh.
"Oh, what does Shunka mean?" Like, "Oh, I named my dog Dog." But but yeah, no, I think just like a good self care day, and I think for me that's kind of fun, going and getting your nails done, going and getting a facial. But
And my own question, what's your sign? What's your horoscope sign?
Pisces.
Me too. Hey, look at us. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tréchelle, for sharing a bit of your story, for sharing your advocacy, and also for sharing your heart on this podcast. I'm so inspired by you, and I know all this country and all of Turtle Island really is looking up to you and can't wait to follow and support your next moves. For listeners, where can people support you? Where can people follow you? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You can follow me on Instagram at Tréchelle with an extra L, so TRECHELLLE.
So you can follow Tréchelle. I'll leave her Instagram handle in the show notes below, as well as if you want to join the reconciliation run, which will be happening this September 27th. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, hi.